If this video appeared to you today, it's not by chance, it's because your soul asked for this very message. Nothing happens by accident when the heart is ready to awaken. Osho used to say, "When the disciple is prepared, the truth finds the way." And if this phrase reached you at this moment, perhaps it is because today is the day when you finally begin to realize that you no longer need to abandon yourself to be accepted, loved, or respected. How many times have you found yourself putting everyone else first and putting your own feelings aside? How many times have you kept quiet to avoid conflict, sacrificed yourself to avoid losing someone, or hidden behind a mask to avoid disappointing someone? This silent, almost invisible habit has a powerful name: self-abandonment, and it is precisely this that opens all the doors to pain, manipulation, toxic relationships, and that emptiness that insists on living inside you. You may not even realize it, but self-abandonment begins with small choices. When you say yes when you mean no, when you force yourself to smile while inside you're falling apart, when you justify yourself to be understood even though you know no one there really cares. And each time you do this, a part of your essence is erased. Little by little, you cease to be a presence and become merely an emotional resource for others, the emergency button everyone knows where to press. Osho reminds us that the true wound lies not in what others do to you, but in what you allow against yourself. No one can hurt you without your silent collaboration. What hurts is not the rejection itself, but the fact that you believe you need to betray yourself to avoid that rejection. What hurts is not the criticism, but your tendency to abandon your own voice to live up to what is expected of you. And this is exactly where the key to this message begins. Nothing and no one can hurt you. When you stop abandoning yourself, when you decide to be whole, when you decide to stand by yourself, when you choose your peace over the approval of others, suddenly, life changes. You discover that you don't need to explain yourself, that you don't need to please, that you no longer need to wear yourself out trying to fit into spaces that were never yours. But before we go any deeper, I want you to reflect. How many times in this last week alone have you abandoned yourself? How many times have you said yes out of fear? How many times have you justified yourself because you didn't want to disappoint? How many times have you held back tears to avoid appearing weak? This is the silent wound we all carry, but few have the courage to face head-on. You may even believe that the problem lies with others, with selfish people, manipulators, demanding family members, friends who only show up when they're needed. But the truth is, none of this would have power over you if it weren't for the space opened up by your own self-abandonment. It's this empty space, this lack of rootedness in yourself, that makes every word, every action, every look turn into pain. Osho said, "Silence is not absence, it is total presence." When you learn to observe yourself without judgment, you realize you no longer need to react to everything, defend yourself, or justify yourself. True power arises when you decide to be a witness to your own life instead of a hostage to other people's expectations. And perhaps you're listening to this right now and feeling a mixture of relief and discomfort. Relief because someone is finally naming what you've always felt. Discomfort because realizing how much you've abandoned yourself up until now can be painful. But don't worry, this discomfort is a sign of awakening. It's the beginning of the movement that will free you from the invisible chains that have bound you for so long. If you've made it this far, it's because within you there's a voice asking to be heard. A voice that says, "I choose my peace. I will never abandon myself again." This simple phrase can become the mantra of your life, the key that transforms pain into strength, emptiness into presence, silence into power. And I want to invite you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because this journey doesn't end here. This is just the first step in a transformation that can completely change the way you relate to yourself and the world. The path to freedom begins when you decide to choose yourself. Now let me show you what really happens when you take that first step, because this is perhaps the most important point in your life. Realizing that no one can hurt you when you stop abandoning yourself. This understanding isn't just a pretty idea to keep in mind. It's a practical key, capable of transforming the way you live every day. When you understand this deeply, you no longer feel hostage to the criticism, manipulation, or expectations that have always suffocated you. You begin to breathe differently, walk more firmly, and look at yourself with respect. And I want to ask you something now. Share with me in the comments. Write a simple but powerful sentence below. "I choose my peace." This isn't just a random comment. It's a public commitment to yourself. It's the first step in telling the world, and especially yourself, that your peace comes first. If this message resonates with you so far, don't let it pass you by. Understanding only becomes transformation when you truly engage with it. So in addition to commenting, remember to leave a like, because that shows me that this conversation is reaching your heart. And if you're not yet part of this community, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel now. This space is made precisely for you, who seek strength, awareness, and inner peace amidst a world that insists on pushing you towards self-abandonment. This isn't just another video, it's a call. And if you felt it resonate within you, stay with me, because we're just beginning to delve into this topic that can change the way you see yourself and how you approach life. Maybe you've spent your entire life explaining yourself, and yet no one has truly understood you. This feeling of talking and still not being heard, not being welcomed, not being recognized, is one of the most silent and simultaneously most devastating pains anyone can carry. And this pain has a name we rarely use, but which accurately defines what corrodes within: self-abandonment. Self-abandonment is when you're always available, always ready, always the emergency button for others, but never for yourself. It's when you become a resource, a tool, a safe haven for others to vent their anguish, while you increasingly lose yourself. It's when you answer every call, reply to every message, are always accessible, but never find space for your own voice. Little by little, life trains you to believe that you're only valuable when you're useful, and this conditioning creates the illusion that if you stop giving, if you stop explaining yourself, if you stop wearing yourself out, you'll be abandoned. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you abandon yourself, the more you feel empty, invisible, and wounded, because no one respects what they don't respect themselves. No one values what they don't value themselves. No one can see in you what you insist on denying. It's a vicious cycle. You give of yourself until there's nothing left, and in the end, you feel angry at the world for not recognizing your effort. But silently, the truth is even harsher. Your pain isn't born from a lack of recognition from others, but from a lack of recognition from yourself. Osho said something profound. When you live only to please, you cease to be a witness. You become an object. And that's exactly what self-abandonment does. It transforms your existence into an object of use. You become predictable, programmed, someone who responds automatically to demands, who molds themselves to fit expectations, who reduces themselves to be accepted. But living like this isn't living. It's merely surviving on autopilot. It's like being a supporting actor in your own life, always playing the role others write, never the role your soul desires. And this pain intensifies because behind it lies a dangerous illusion. The idea that if you give up on yourself, you'll finally be loved. It's the hope that if you sacrifice yourself, someone will notice, recognize, and return the care. But this return rarely comes. The result is a tired heart, an exhausted body, and a mind that doesn't understand why it constantly chases crumbs of attention while delivering feasts of energy. Perhaps you recognize this dynamic in yourself. Always available, always ready, always the friend who listens, the partner who gives in, the child who explains, the colleague who never says no. But in the silence of the night, when all the voices around you fall silent, what remains? A void, an echo, a feeling that no one truly sees you, that no one knows how hard you strive to be enough. This is the invisible effect of self-abandonment. You begin to believe that your life has no center, that you exist only for the sake of others, and this distances you further and further from your own essence. The cruelest thing is that self-abandonment disguises itself as virtue. People even praise you. They say you're generous, that you have a huge heart, that you're trustworthy, and deep down, you're even proud of it. But this pride comes with a wound. You feel used, drained, as if your energy is constantly being sapped, because what appears to be virtue is often just a lack of boundaries. The whole world benefits from your dedication, but you continue to bleed in silence. The truth is, until you name this pain, it continues to control your life, and that's why it's so important to name it: self-abandonment. Saying that word is already an act of courage. It's like turning on a light in a dark room where you've been stumbling for years. When you understand that it's not just fatigue, not just a lack of energy, not just life being difficult, but a pattern of self-abandonment, then something inside you begins to change. because you realize there is a choice, there is another path. Osho always pointed to awareness as the key to transformation, and it's precisely this awareness that you need now. To observe, to recognize, to witness. Not to blame yourself, but to testify, yes, I have abandoned myself. This recognition isn't to be ashamed of, but to reclaim power. Because when you become aware, no one can manipulate what you already know. And I want you to do something right now, something small but powerful. Write the phrase in the comments, I don't abandon myself anymore. That's all. This phrase is a declaration, a breakthrough, a key that can open a new phase of your life. When you publicly commit to these words, you're saying not only to me but to yourself that it's time to stop hiding behind other people's expectations. And remember, this is just the beginning. We're just beginning to dismantle the self-abandonment trap, and in the next few minutes we'll explore even deeper how you can break free from this invisible prison and begin walking back to yourself. Have you ever noticed how often your greatest prison isn't what others say or do, but the guilt you carry for wanting to protect yourself? It's as if there's a voice inside you that repeats over and over, if I say no, I'll seem selfish. If I pull away, I'll disappoint. If I'm unavailable, I'll lose people's love. This voice is a reflection of years of being conditioned to believe that taking care of yourself is wrong, that choosing your own peace is a form of abandonment. But the truth is exactly the opposite. What you call selfishness is often just spiritual intelligence. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual intelligence. This phrase needs to echo within you like a mantra, because what truly destroys your life force isn't saying no, but living a life where you never choose yourself. The guilt you feel isn't yours, it was implanted. It was society. It was family expectations. It was toxic relationships that instilled in you the idea that the value of your life lies in how often you sacrifice yourself, and you believed it. But the time has come to break with this lie. Osho said something profound. Silence is not absence, it is total presence. This phrase contains a huge secret. Because when you choose to withdraw, when you choose silence over explanation, when you choose not to react instead of exhausting yourself, you are not disappearing, you are finally appearing whole. Conscious silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is you taking back the space that was always yours. And it is in this space that true freedom is born. Think for a moment about how many times you've forced yourself to speak, to justify yourself, to defend yourself, just to maintain someone's image of being always available. Every word spoken in these situations wasn't communication, it was a request for approval. And every time you seek external approval, you lose touch with your inner essence. Silence, on the other hand, is the choice to remain present without needing to prove anything. It's a gesture of inner authority. When you understand this, you begin to realize that there's nothing wrong with setting boundaries. The mistake is believing that boundaries are rejection. Boundaries, in fact, are about relationship education. They're the purest form of respect, both for yourself and for the other person. It's like saying, I choose myself, and because I choose myself, I can have relationships without destroying myself. This is spiritual maturity. It's awareness. And only those who have the courage to face their guilt and disarm the inner voices that tell you to always be the savior, always available, always perfect, can reach this point. The big turning point is this. When you stop abandoning yourself, guilt loses its power, because you realize that taking care of yourself was never wrong. What's wrong is living your entire life chasing other people's expectations and calling it love. True love doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. True love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. Loving yourself is the root that sustains all other love. And if that root is broken, no relationship will flourish healthily. I know that perhaps right now you're feeling a weight, a mixture of relief and resistance. Part of you agrees, feels the truth vibrating in every word. But another part still clings to the old belief that you'll be rejected if you start choosing yourself. This duality is normal. And it's at this very point that you need courage. Courage to face the guilt and ask, is this voice really mine, or is it a legacy of what I've learned to believe? Guilt, when observed clearly, dissolves, because you discover that it was never a sign of error, but merely an echo of the past. And here Osho's teaching comes into play again. Silence is not absence. When you become silent in the face of guilt, when you stop fighting it and simply observe it, you realize that there is a greater space within you, a space of presence. This space is untouchable. It is your essence. It is the place from which springs the peace that depends on no one. And I want you to imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you no longer felt guilty about choosing yourself. Imagine waking up and knowing you can say no without having to explain yourself. Imagine walking away from what drains you without feeling like you're committing a crime. Imagine looking at yourself and feeling proud that you put your energy first. This isn't utopia. It's a real, accessible path, and it begins when you give yourself the ethical license to change. This is the bottom line. You have permission. Permission to stop justifying yourself. Permission to rest. Permission to choose peace over conflict. Permission to protect yourself without carrying the burden of guilt. Because life wasn't meant to be an endless stream of justifications, but to be a space of conscious presence. And if this message has resonated with you so far, I want to ask you something. Write the phrase in the comments, "I choose my peace first." This sentence is more than just words. It's a public declaration that you understand that protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual intelligence. By writing this, you're making a commitment to yourself, a pact that, from now on, you'll begin to put yourself at the center of your own life. Have you ever stopped to notice how your life often repeats itself like a predictable script? It's as if you're trapped in a play where you always play the same role, respond the same way, and react the same way, even when deep down you want to change. This predictability is precisely what fuels the cycle of self-abandonment. The people around you know that all they have to do is push certain buttons to get the expected response from you. And every time you respond the same way, every time you react the programmed way, you reinforce the idea that you're there to fulfill that role, not to be whole. Predictability breeds abuse. Not necessarily physical abuse, but energetic, emotional, and even spiritual abuse. When everyone already knows you'll give in, that you'll justify yourself, that you'll exhaust yourself to maintain harmony, you become an easy target. Your energy is no longer respected because it's considered infinite, available at any time. And the truth is, no one has infinite energy. When you abandon yourself to sustain this game, the bill comes in the form of exhaustion, emptiness, and resentment. But why do you continue in this role even though you feel the pain? Because there's something deeper keeping you there. Guilt. Guilt is the invisible cement that holds up the walls of this prison. It's what whispers, if you change, you'll seem cold. If you set boundaries, you'll be rejected. If you don't explain yourself, they'll think you don't care. And out of fear of these consequences, you continue to follow the script. You don't realize that guilt is not a sign of love, but a psychological trap to maintain control over you. And this is where the paradigm shift happens. Because, deep down, it's not people who have power over you. It's not your demanding boss, your controlling partner, or your critical family. What really keeps you stuck is your reaction. As long as you react the same way, the game continues. But when you stop reacting, the game ends. It's simple and revolutionary at the same time. Imagine someone used to pressing a button and always getting the same response from you. Suddenly, that button no longer works. What happens? The dynamic breaks. The energy that sustained that pattern disappears. Osho said, "The conditioned mind loves patterns. Witnessing dissolves the pattern." This phrase holds the key. As long as you live conditioned, responding automatically to external pressures, you are trapped in the game of self-abandonment. But when you become a witness, when you observe without reacting, you dissolve the pattern. The witness doesn't need to justify, doesn't need to explain, doesn't need to fall into the cycle of predictability. The witness remains present but is not controlled. And perhaps you're wondering, but how do I do this in practice? How can I stop reacting if everything inside me has been trained to react? The answer lies in understanding that silence and pause are not weakness but power. When you choose not to react immediately, you create space. And this space is where freedom is born. A space where you can decide, where you can choose a new path instead of repeating the old one. It's like breaking a chain. Each time you act differently, the chain weakens. At first, it may seem impossible because the impulse to react is strong, almost automatic. But each time you allow yourself to pause, observe, breathe before responding, you regain a piece of your energy. And over time, what felt natural, always giving in, always justifying yourself, always abandoning yourself, begins to lose its power. The big revelation here is that you don't need to fight the whole world to free yourself. You just need to break your own pattern of response. It's not about changing others. It's about changing the way you interact with others. It's not about controlling what happens around you. It's about witnessing without being drawn in. It's an internal shift, silent, but capable of completely transforming your reality. Now imagine what your life would be like if, suddenly, people could no longer predict your responses. Imagine what it would be like if you stopped explaining yourself in situations where you've always justified yourself. Imagine if, instead of reacting automatically, you simply observed, breathed, and remained present. Your energy would no longer be drained because there would no longer be a game to sustain. The power would be back in your hands. And this is where I want to invite you to reflect even more deeply. How much of your life today is being controlled by the autopilot of predictability? How much do you cling to roles that no longer make sense simply because you fear guilt? How much of your silence is still not presence but fear of loss? Questions like these aren't meant to accuse you, but to wake you up. Because transformation only begins when you clearly see how much you are being controlled by invisible patterns. When you begin to break these patterns, something extraordinary happens. The same energy that was previously spent reacting begins to transform into creative force. The space previously occupied by guilt begins to be filled with awareness. Life stops being repetitive and starts being about choice. And it all begins with the simple act of stopping reacting as usual. And I want you to do something now, something that will help you fix this change within yourself. Write the phrase in the comments, "I break the pattern now." This isn't just a phrase, it's a declaration. It's a sign that you've understood that predictability breeds abuse, that guilt keeps you stuck in the role, and that when you stop reacting, the game is over. It's a commitment to your inner freedom, a concrete step toward a new way of living. And get ready, because there's still much more to be revealed. We are just opening the door to understanding how to transform this understanding into daily practice, and how to strengthen your presence so that no one can trap you in the cycle of self-abandonment. Now that you've begun to see how patterns of predictability and guilt sustain the cycle of self-abandonment, it's time to turn this understanding into practice. It's no use simply understanding intellectually. It's no use simply repeating pretty phrases. True power comes when you decide to experience breaking this pattern physically, in real life. It's at that moment that awareness transforms into liberation. The first protocol is simple, yet profoundly challenging. Try living 24 hours without justifying yourself, that's all. It sounds easy, but it isn't. You'll notice how the urge to explain yourself arises almost automatically. Someone calls you to something, and you start to formulate a sentence to avoid appearing rude, to avoid disappointing, to avoid being thought badly of. This impulse is precisely proof of how self-abandonment has taken root within you. So during this challenge, whenever you feel the need to justify yourself, choose to simply say, "I can't do it today." This phrase, however short, carries enormous power, because it's clear, direct, leaves no room for manipulation, and most importantly, protects your energy. You don't owe anyone an explanation for every choice, every limit, every no. The habit of constantly justifying yourself is a way of surrendering your peace in exchange for approval. It's as if you're signing an invisible contract, promising to sacrifice yourself to keep the other person satisfied. This contract needs to be torn up, and the phrase, "I can't do it today," is your way to start. But I know it's not easy. At first, the discomfort will be intense. You'll feel a weight on your chest as if you've done something wrong. Guilt will try to overwhelm you. Some people may even complain, frown, or try to pressure you. But remember, this isn't a sign of a mistake. It's a sign that you're breaking the pattern. Discomfort is proof that something is changing. And every time you stand firm, even in the face of guilt, you strengthen your inner space. If at any point this challenge feels overwhelming, there is an equally powerful alternative. Practice 90 seconds of silence before responding. Breathe, close your eyes if you can, observe the impulse to react, but don't move. These 90 seconds are an exercise in presence. They create the space necessary for you to realize whether your response is coming from consciousness or simply from conditioning. Often, just this brief pause is enough to dissolve the automatic urge to please. Silence, as Osho reminded us, is not absence. Silence is total presence. You'll be amazed at the power of this practice. By experiencing silence, you discover that not every question deserves an answer. Not every provocation requires a reaction. Not every expectation needs to be met. Life isn't a race to see who answers the fastest. It's a journey to learn to respond truthfully. And only those who create inner space can respond from their own essence. These protocols aren't just exercises. They're keys that open the door to a new state of being. And most importantly, you don't have to wait months to see results. The transformation begins immediately. From the very first day, you'll feel something different. Perhaps a sense of strangeness. Perhaps an unexpected lightness. Perhaps even a strength you didn't know you had. Because every time you choose yourself, even for a moment, you reconnect with your essence. And understand one important thing: the world doesn't fall apart when you choose yourself. What falls apart are only illusions. The people who truly respect you will stay by your side. True relationships don't break because you set a limit. They grow stronger. What dissolves are only connections based on dependence and manipulation. And that's not loss, it's liberation. You need to feel firsthand what it means to live a day without justifying yourself. You need to experience the silence that isn't absence, but total presence. Because only then will you understand, not theoretically but experientially, that protecting your energy isn't selfishness, it's spiritual intelligence. So, I want to propose a commitment to you now. For the next 24 hours, choose one of these practices. Or simply say, "I can't today," whenever you feel the need to justify yourself, or do the 90-second silence exercise before responding. And then, come back here and share your feelings. Write the phrase in the comments, "I choose my peace." This sentence is more than just a comment. It's a declaration to yourself, a way to anchor this decision in the real world. When you write, you affirm. And when you affirm, you begin to create the reality you want to live. By now you've realized that breaking the cycle of self-abandonment requires presence, conscious silence, and the courage to break predictability. But there's a very important point that needs to be brought up now. Setting boundaries doesn't mean becoming cold, insensitive, or distant. Many people confuse firmness with harshness, energy protection with selfishness, and silence with indifference. And this is precisely where understanding safe polarity comes in, a middle path that integrates awareness and compassion. A true boundary isn't a punishment. A boundary is a way of educating the relationship. It's the most honest way of saying to the other person, "Here is the space where I can be present without losing myself." When you create this space, you're not rejecting anyone. You're simply protecting what's most sacred, your own essence. And those who truly love you remain. Because genuine love isn't possession, it's not dependence, it's not exploitation. Genuine love understands that for there to be connection, each person needs to be whole. What goes away isn't love. What goes away is the excess. What suffocated, what drained you, what you accepted out of fear. This is where Osho's words take on even greater depth. Compassion without awareness becomes attachment. Awareness without compassion becomes hardness. This phrase is a guide because it shows that simply setting limits isn't enough. You need to set them consciously. If you set limits without compassion, you risk closing yourself off from life, becoming rigid and falling into isolation. But if you set compassion without awareness, you end up trapped in attachment, carrying responsibilities that aren't yours, confusing love with imprisonment. Balance lies where awareness and compassion meet. When you understand this, you realize you can say no without being aggressive. You can walk away without becoming indifferent. You can choose your peace without giving up love. Limits don't destroy relationships. They purify them. They separate what's healthy from what's abusive, what's truthful from what's manipulative. And it's this separation that brings clarity to everyone involved. Often, when you first set a limit, the other person is startled because they're used to your predictability. But this shock is just the beginning of a re-education process. Little by little, those who truly value you learn to relate in a new way, more honest, more balanced, more respectful. You may have heard phrases like, "You've changed," "You're different," or even "You've become cold." These phrases arise when people can no longer control you as easily as they once did. But consider this. If someone could only be by your side while you abandoned yourself, was that presence truly love or just convenience? Limits reveal the truth. And yes, some people may drift apart. But understand, something sustained solely by your sacrifice doesn't deserve to be called a relationship. The path of safe polarity isn't about cocooning yourself, but but about remaining centered. You remain present, you remain loving, you remain open to life, but without betraying yourself. This is true spirituality applied to everyday life. It's looking into someone's eyes, feeling compassion for their pain, but not carrying it as if it were your own. It's being available to help, but not to the point of self-destruction. It's understanding that silence also communicates love, because it protects the peace that sustains all other connections. Gradually, you realize that this balance creates truer relationships. Because whoever stays by your side, after you begin to respect yourself, stays for who you truly are, not for the role you played. And this is liberating. You stop living surrounded by bonds of dependence and start living surrounded by bonds of authenticity. This process can be uncomfortable at first. You may feel misunderstood, guilt may creep back in, and fear of abandonment may rear its ugly head. But remember, a limit isn't rejection, it's self-love. And if someone can't accept your self-love, they were never ready to truly love you. Osho said that compassion without awareness turns into attachment. Think about it. How many times have you confused attachment with love? How many times have you stayed in relationships that hurt you because you felt you couldn't leave the other person alone? That's not compassion, it's imprisonment. Likewise, awareness without compassion turns into hardness. How many times, while protecting yourself, have you felt like shutting yourself off forever, never trusting anyone again? That's the other extreme, equally destructive. The middle path is knowing how to say no without losing tenderness, knowing how to set boundaries without losing humanity. This is true power, walking with awareness and compassion together, without abandoning yourself or the capacity to love. This power is not loud, aggressive, or arrogant. It is a quiet, rooted power that conveys respect simply by the way you position yourself. And now I want to ask you something very simple, but that can mark this moment in your life. Write the phrase in the comments, "My limit is love." This phrase carries within itself the essence of what we've discussed so far. Because when you say this, you affirm that you're not running away, you're not rejecting, you're not becoming cold. You're educating the relationships around you so they can flourish without destroying your peace. When you stop abandoning yourself, no one can hurt you anymore, because finally, you emerge whole, present, conscious, with a strength that doesn't depend on approval or applause. This is true rebirth, ceasing to be a shadow of yourself and becoming a living presence in life. But before I go, let me ask you for two very important things. First, subscribe to the channel now, because each video here is part of this same spiritual journey you're on, and I want you to receive all the upcoming messages that will deepen this path. Second, if you stayed with me until the end, please leave a like. That's a sign that this message truly touched you. Now go ahead and watch the next video that appears on the screen. This is just the beginning of your transformation.